the front pages of the newspapers today, they are still dominated by that one story, the horrific murder of a young man on the streets of Woolwich. The Sunday Express headline, Army Wives Terror Fear. The Star, My Love for Hero Terror Victim. The Independent, a picture emerges. It's a photo collage on their front page of the event and the fallout from it. The Mail, Cameron, I'll gag the hate clerics. And so it goes on, the broadsheets concentrating on the same story. So we're looking at that in a lot more detail this morning. David Cameron has said he wants to crack down on the so-called preachers of hate after the killing of drummer Lee Rigby in Woolwich on Wednesday. And he's assembling a special committee which he will himself chair. And he's going to include senior cabinet members and security chiefs. Downing Street says it's going to build on the preventing extremism strategy, which was set up by Labour after the 2005 London bombings. However, the current government did review the Prevent approach in 2011 and decided that some of the money was going to groups who, in fact, should have been confronted, not funded, and the budget was cut almost in half. So what should be the new approach? Well, we've got an excellent panel to discuss this today. We have Rafiq Hayat, who's the National President of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Association UK. Also with us, Lord Carlisle, the former terrorism law watchdog, and Keith Vaz, also with us, chair of the Commons Home Affairs Select Committee. Welcome, gentlemen, all. Rafiq, can I start with you? First of all, you had a large gathering at prayers on Friday, some 5,000, am I right in saying?
Indeed, yes. We at the largest mosque in Morden, we had almost 5,000 people who came for prayers, and the Friday sermon was devoted to this story. And we wanted to share the loss with the family of the deceased, and special prayers were offered for the family and the deceased.
And that in itself is an interesting story. 5,000 people in a mosque praying for Lee Rigby. What have you made of the coverage thus far this week?
Well, we think that what has happened is appalling. I mean, this has been done in the name of faith and Islam. It's got nothing to do with Islam. Islam is a religion of peace, in itself means peace. And the teaching says that if you kill one individual, it is as if you've killed the whole of mankind.
Right, so that was a quote that was used by Nick Clegg earlier in the week, and we've heard it a few times after the attack in Woolwich. Tell me this, if so many are saying that with such united voices, where are these young people being radicalised and who's responsible?
Well, I think there are a number of places where they've been radicalised. Firstly, I think we have to look at our universities. At universities, some of the preachers of hate go in there freely and are able to give this message to our children in universities. And universities, on the pretext of freedom of speech, allow this thing to go on. And I think this is the first area that should be targeted to see what is happening within our universities.
So targeted how? If somebody is on university or further education premises and is, let's say, doing a speech, I mean, some of the ones that we know do go on, foreign policy leads to murder on these shores, that kind of thing. Do you think those should be banned? The people who say these things reported? How would you go about it?
Well, I think the thing is that a lot of these people are well known for their message of hatred. And if the deans of universities are aware that a particular speaker is coming who has this as the agenda, then they must not allow them to come into the universities. Otherwise, we continue with this cycle, and somewhere we have to break the cycle. OK,
Lord Carlisle, you have been cited in an article this morning by Professor Michael Burley as one of the only voices of sanity during the whole Prevent strategy that took place after the 7/7 bombings. And you were worried about university campuses too, weren't you?
Yes, it's kind of Professor Burley to cite me. In fact, I did the independent review of the government's review of the Prevent policy in 2011 when they replaced the Labour government's Prevent policy with their own. I think the policy that was produced was good. I regret the cut in funding because I think the return on a properly funding Prevent policy is very high. I believe that the delivery of the Prevent policy has been patchy around the country, excellent in some cities, for example Birmingham, not so good elsewhere. I welcome the appointment of a high-level ministerial committee so that we can try and produce a good standard of prevent policy around the country.
Right, OK, well, let's talk about, I mean, at the moment you're in the news very much about the so-called Snoopers charity, or the Communications and Data's bill that you're bringing forward, or you're saying that should be considered much more seriously than it has in the past. We'll come to that in a moment, but just on this issue of students and university campuses, what do you advocate then? Because the university and college leaders, as I remember it at the time, were saying, look, this is a sacrosanct place of free thought, free expression. Do you want us to inform on our students? There's a great deal of discomfort about it. So I wonder how you would have the country go about this, and what would be acceptable.
Well, this is something that I advised on publicly in 2011. I think some universities have not taken their responsibilities seriously. They would not allow people to speak on campus who advocated how best to commit an armed robbery or how to be a paedophile. Yet they are allowing people on their campuses who are allowed to speak about the virtues of violent jihadism, which is designed to bring about political change. That is organized crime, just like the other examples I mentioned. I would therefore like university vice-chancellors and principals, and the principals of FE colleges, to take this responsibility far more seriously. I would also like the Federation of Student Islamic Societies, FOSIS, to take their responsibility more seriously. There is no place on campuses for people who favour violence for political ends.
Well, let's bring Keith Vaz in on this, Chair of the Commons Home Affairs Select Committee. Mr Vaz, good morning.
Morning, Anita.
So would you have the doors of universities opened and bright lights shone inside, as advocated by our last two speakers?
Well, I don't disagree with anything that Rafiq and Alex Carlile have said. I think that both of them realise that there are a whole different ways in which we can tackle this issue. But what concerns me more than anything is this view that we need another policy review. I think the work that Lord Carlile has done in reviewing the Prevent strategy, the Select Committee itself produced a very large report on the roots of radicalism a few months ago. It's all there, in a sense. And although, of course, I welcome what the Prime Minister has done, it's always good to have a strong emphasis at the centre of government. I'm not sure whether a committee just of cabinet ministers is going to be the answer, because cabinet ministers do get very busy, and this is something that really does occupy the minds of the public. So
what are they not doing that they have the powers to do right now?
As you know, I'm uncomfortable with this word prevent in the first place. I think the key to the solution one of the keys to the solution to all this is the community itself. And people like Rafiq, and what is happening in the communities up and down the country. I represent Leicester. I have 15,000 Muslims living in my constituency, 37 mosques. I think that the community needs to be put at the centre of this. The idea of infiltration of the community, monitoring of the community, monitoring of universities. I mean, Anita, you know the community as well. The fact is, at the end of the day, unless you carry them with you, unless you put them centre stage, all the committees of good and wise men and women are not going to solve this issue.
But you have, yes, I do know the committee, but also I'm quite fascinated in the number of calls that have come forward of late. I mean, you've got groups which consist of former extremists who now work and advise government bodies. You've got Rafiq here, you've got other religious leaders saying, look, you know what, it isn't about the stop calling us the community as if, you know, you would expect the Christians to answer for everything the Westboro Baptists do or Anders Breivik does. We have a problem with criminality. Treat it as such. Go after the criminals.
There's no question of that. And one of the things that we recommended 18 months ago was more should be done about radicalisation coming from the internet. And we actually suggested that internet service providers like Google and others were actually quite laid back when confronted with items that are on the internet. You can go on the internet now and you can see sermons of Anwar al-Awlaki, even though he died a few months ago. And I think that internet service providers need to do much more with government in order to sort this problem out. I think radicalization, as people like Alex Carlile and Rafiq and other people know, does not just happen in one area. And it happens in prisons We said that when people who've been radicalized in prisons or monitored in prisons are released, there is no mechanism for them to be monitored within the community.
Right.
It just doesn't exist.
So
Would
you go as far then as Lord Carlisle and say, right, we need some kind of data communications charter, the Snoopers Charter, as some who are opposed to it refer to it, that monitors everything on the internet, all of our emails, the traffic.
It doesn't monitor everything. That's a misleading statement about the Communications Data Bill. The Communications Data Bill does not suggest that a single email should be read. What it suggests is that there should be a way of tracking the traffic, the when, the from whom, the to whom. And it is absolutely a given in the detection of other crime that communications data is valuable. It's used every day of the week in courts. And I'm astonished by the ignorance behind the use of the term Snoopers Charter. I'm absolutely applaud what a former Home Secretary, John Reid, said the other day on Newsnight. I was there with him, and also Lord West, to the effect that we need this law.
Well, I certainly wasn't suggesting that all emails will be read, but you will know that those who are opposed to it, Lord Carlisle says yours is a step too far, and I wonder whether Keith Vaz thinks the same.
Yes. I probably am with Alex Carlisle's leader, Nick Clegg, on this. I'm not against what Alex has suggested, and he's quite right to say that there is a misunderstanding as to precisely what is proposed, and he is probably a better communicator on this than some of those who've been in government who've not put it as clearly as he's just done. But I think that once you know, I think what the British people don't want is the thought that every email that they send and every single communication they receive is being monitored. I think there's a difference between content and form, which is what Lord Carlisle is talking about. But at the moment, I don't think that there are sufficient safeguards. I understand perfectly why successive governments have wanted this. This is not a Tory government thing. This is what Alan Johnson wanted when he was Home Secretary. But as someone who was burnt over the 42 days issue, where we went along with the last government in order to have detention of 42 days, and even though we thought we had the safeguards, I think it's right that we should be cautious, that's all, and we get all those safeguards out into the open and communicate them as effectively as Alex Carlisle has done today.
Right, well, we welcome you to communicate with the programme today. 85058 is where you can do that. The Home Secretary, Theresa May, has been speaking about Prevent strategies, and let's just hear what she has to say.
The Prevent programme, and it's right that the government has a programme which is countering radicalisation, which is both countering the ideology that leads to radicalisation, but is also working with individuals and working in institutions like prisons where radicalisation might take place. And that Prevent programme, we've already improved it. Since we came into government, we've changed it. I'm excluding more extremist preachers than have been excluded before. We've got more high-quality programmes, working with more people. We've introduced a new programme which actually isn't for those who are immediately at danger of radicalisation, but for those who are perhaps further out. And around 2,000 people have been worked with in just the last year in that particular part of the programme, and we're doing more work with more prisoners in more prisons.
So that was the Home Secretary speaking moments ago on the Andrew Marr programme. So Rafiq Hayat, she did talk about extremist preachers. She was going to crack down even further. She says she's already done quite a lot and would do more to stop them coming into the country. Just how easy is it for extremists to come into this country and preach their hatred?
I think it is very easy for extremists to come in and preach. It's at different levels. The thing is that we have a lot of preachers coming from the subcontinent who bring their message of hate into this country, and there is absolutely no one monitoring. I mean, we pick up a few big shots who everyone knows, but they're the problem as well. But there are lots of imams who come from the Indian subcontinent who bring with them a message of hate. Now, let me just say this, that we have 2.5 million Muslims in this country, and I would say 99% are peace-loving and ordinary citizens, very loyal people to this country who want to make a good life in this country for themselves and their children. We are only talking about a small element within the Muslim community. However, these preachers of hate come and imbue their message of hate into our children. to start with. And that is where, unfortunately, I know we're talking about internet. I think internet is a second stage. The initial stage, the message of hate, is imbued into the children.
OK, well, let's take the first strata, if that do you think is the first line of attack. Because many of these preachers who do come from the Asian subcontinent preach in languages that are not in English, is it not then beholden, and maybe you can tell us, do Muslim people like yourself, like other community elders, or even not community elders, just your average Joe, do they get in touch with the police and say, look, you've got to get down to this mosque because this is what this man has said this afternoon? Do they do that enough?
No, I don't think so. I think a lot more people need to take responsibility. Sometimes we sit and listen to the sermon and we think, oh, this is not right, what he's saying. But then we go away and don't do anything about it.
So what can you do? What can one do? What can we do about that?
Well, the thing is that I think we need to educate our children. I think the community elders have a very important role. Sometimes you find that the elders are very decent people, but they sometimes employ these imams, and they really need to make sure that they clamp down and say, look, this is what is going to be acceptable within our mosque.
OK, well, Keith Vaz, this is a really interesting thing, and you know a lot about these communities. This whole idea of a community elder, isn't there just an enormous disconnect between who most people believe to be the elders and the young people who can get indoctrinated by such words?
Yes, I think this has been a fascinating discussion, and that's why I think people like Rafiq should be sitting on the task force rather than necessarily a whole lot of cabinet ministers. Actually, the solutions can come from outside government and Whitehall, because if government and Whitehall had the answers, if everything that Lord Carlisle had said had been implemented, everything that the Select Committee had said had been implemented, I think we would be in a better place. The actual monitoring is a big problem, and that's why I would be keen to know how we can monitor. Is it the issue of entry clearance at the time that somebody applies for a visa, when we should be looking at people's views? Or is it what happens once they come into the country? If it is, what's the best mechanism of getting that information to government so these people can be removed? It's this practical stuff. I think we've got the theory right. We can't keep revisiting the theory with constant reviews. It's getting down to practicality.
Well, let's. I mean, I don't know many people who've thought about this matter as much as you have, Lord Carlisle. Just when it comes to brass tacks, do we have a handle on it? Because positing what would be ideal and making that happen, very different things, aren't they?
Well, I agree completely with Keith Vaz that we do not want to revisit the whole mechanism time and time again. I believe we have a decent prevent policy in place. The issue is about implementation. I'm not against ministers sitting down together and discussing this, as they must, and it's what the public expect of them. But actually, my observation is that the best way of implementing this policy is at a very local level. Those local authorities that have devolved these issues down to ward level have produced the best results. I cited Birmingham earlier as an example, and it's worth looking at. There are other examples. It's one I have some experience of. Waltham Forest, London Borough, would be another example. Ministers need to see how the examples of excellence work and then apply them across the country. One of my worries is that ministers live at a very esoteric, grand level and spend very little time looking at what works on the ground. 15-minute visits won't do, especially if the objective of them is to be publicised. So I would expect ministers, if they're going to have this task force, to commit some value time to seeing what really works in communities.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. It's a fascinating discussion, and one we will continue in a little while, albeit we're going to follow another track on this. We're going to look at the way in which the security services have, in the past and may in the future, infiltrate these very dangerous groups that all of us have been discussing this morning. My thanks to Rafiq Hayat, to Keith Vaz and to Lord Carlisle.